Phinehas, a very, very zealous man, and really therefore an example for all of us. You know, this subject that we're considering tonight is a very big subject. We're only very briefly going to try and consider it tonight and cover most of the subject, but it's worth studying and worth looking at this man and taking his example and seeing if we can apply it within our lives. Now, first of all, there are 3 Phinehases in the Bible. 3 different Phinehases in the Old Testament. Here they are represented for us. One who was of the priestly family, later on to become high priest. Then another one, the wicked son of Eli. Remember in the area of early 1st of Samuel chapter 2 and 3. And then the last one, Eleazar, son of Phinehas, another man. But the one we're considering tonight is that one. That person there. We're not going to consider any of the others. We haven't time for that. That's for sure. But you know, Phinehas was a very remarkable person. And I'd like you, if you can with me, to come with me to Psalm 106. Now, I've got it on the board, but I really think it's worth us looking at it because it's very consequential in the life of Phinehas, talking about Phinehas and how God viewed him. Now, when we look at it, come with me to Psalm 106 and verse 28, and let's follow it through. And we're going to have a look at a few of the words that we read there that I think you'll find very thrilling, very exciting, and therefore, hey, a good example of what we could be, God willing, if we can follow his model today. Now, let's begin, because we haven't got a terrible lot of time. Come with me to verse 28. Psalm 106, verse 28. They joined themselves also unto Baal Peor. Now we read of that. That was the iniquity. And ate the sacrifices of the dead. Thus they provoked him to anger with their inventions. And the plague brake in upon them. We read of that. Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment. And so the plague was stayed. And that was counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. Now, that's last words I want you to think about. Does that remind you of any other words that you might have read about? That counted unto him for righteousness unto all generations forevermore. Can you think of another word? Here it is. In Genesis 15, that's almost the same as what's referred to Abraham. Believe Yahweh and it was counted unto him for righteousness. Wow. He's aligned with Abraham. In the New Testament, in Romans chapter 4, it says, therefore it was imputed to Abraham for righteousness, and so it should be for this man. Wow. So think about it. There it is. What a wonderful comment. Worth writing those quotes down in the margin. Against, of course, verse 31. What a wonderful man that we're considering tonight. The man Phinehas. But now I haven't got a lot of time to leave PowerPoints up. We've got to move ahead. So, there we are. There's Phinehas. Counted unto him for righteousness. And that was the case also for Phinehas. Now, what are we going to consider tonight? Well, there are various subjects at various times Phinehas is referred to. And there we are, the occasions that it's referred to in the scriptures. All right? Now, see those numbers along the side? I'm going to pick those numbers up and follow through with almost all of them tonight very briefly so that we're considering Phinehas. All right? So the first one, he was a descendant of the priestly tribe of Levi. So here's Phinehas's family, right? Right out before they were in Egypt, Amram and Jochebed came together, and Aaron, and Moses, of course, was born. But from Aaron married Eliashib, and out of that came Eleazar. Eleazar married the daughter of Puthuel, and out of that came Phinehas. So, look, great-grandparents. What an amazing person he was. He was of the Levitical order and of the priestly order, a descendant of Aaron. What a wonderful man he must have been, or what a wonderful descent He was. But he was indeed. He lived up to that descent and behaved himself very wisely in Israel. So Aaron's grandson, an amazing person. Now, let's take the first of those headings. Now look, come back with me just for a second. See that? I'm picking up these and following through them, and you'll see those items coming up each time. So here we are. First of all, we're going to look at the fact that he's a descendant of Aaron. And what did that mean? Well, what happened to him? He probably lived about 10 years in Egypt. And then he was taken for 40 years into the wilderness wanderings. So because he wasn't, 20 years old and above, he then came into the promised land. Then 10 years in the land, then finally he becomes the high priest. So here he is in Egypt, wilderness wanderings in the land, and high priest. So there's the spread of his life. And so Phinehas probably was a priest from halfway through the wilderness wanderings when he became 30 years of age. And then in the land, later in the land, he became the high priest. All right? So there is the pattern of his life. All right? The structure of his life. But now let's look at what took place. So still looking at his family structure, he was the great upholder of righteousness. He was truly an amazing, zealous brother. We read about that just a few minutes ago. All right? He was called, though, I suppose it's worth turning up. Come back with me because we're going to come to Numbers in a minute. But if you come with me into Numbers chapter 25, verse 11, it's probably worth colouring in if you've got the chance to do so. It says, Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron, the priest, that turned my wrath away from the children of Israel, while he was zealous for my sake. And again in verse 13 of that chapter, and he shall have it, and his seed after him, even the covenant of an everlasting priesthood, because he was zealous. Let's hope that's us. That's what we're doing, zealous. So he's a real example for us, as he showed purity of practice, as we'll see, in the principles of the truth. Do we do that? Are we walking in that way? That's what we should do. So he's a real model for us. Okay? So, if you come back with me to Exodus 6, we come to his genealogy, so to speak. It's only not a terribly important chapter to look at, but indeed it refers to him. So in Exodus chapter 6, we have here a list of 3 tribes. Now, it's really quite strange because verse 14, I'll read it to you. In verse 14, these be the heads of their fathers' houses. The first, Reuben of the firstborn. And so here we have the family of Reuben. Then verse 15, then the sons of Simeon. And then verses 16 to 25, we have Levi and nobody else. Levi. Okay? And it ends with Phinehas. Okay? Let's come, I think it's verse 25. Yes. And Eleazar, Aaron's sons, took him one of the daughters of Portuel to wife, and she bare him Phinehas. And these are the heads of the families of the Levites according to their family. So that's critical. And so it goes through the family genealogy of 2 tribes very briefly, and then in detail Levi, and particularly ends with Phinehas. Well, here's the names. Eleazar, God has helped. The mother-in-law of a daughter of Putiel, afflicted by God. I don't know quite what that means, but anyhow. Nadab, we're going to look at that a little later on, as one who followed his own free will, one's free will. And Abihu, liberal, and they're listed for us in chapter 6, verse 23. There they are, uncles of Phinehas. But now, let's come to the second incident. And in so doing, I'd like you to come with me to Exodus 24. So having looked at the family tree, and it seemed very interesting that in Exodus chapter 6, it ends with Phinehas. Obviously a highlight in that family trees that we saw there. Now, in chapter 24, verse 1, and he said unto Moses, God said unto Moses, come up to Yahweh, thou and Aaron and Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and worship ye afar off. Notice, come up to Yahweh, yes, approach towards him, but a worship afar off. Now look at verse 2. Moses alone shall come near Yahweh, but they shall not come near or nigh, neither shall the people go up with him. So that was the point that had to happen. They had to be far off. But Nadab and Abihu, they didn't do just that. Now, probably it's worth keeping your hand there. Exodus, no, I don't think we'll come back to Exodus 24. Come with me now to Leviticus chapter 9. Now, I'm sorry about us having to turn up so much, but as I said, it's spread out over the record quite a bit. And so we've got quite a bit to look at and go through the scriptures. Now, in Leviticus chapter 9, verse 23, we read, and Moses and Aaron went into the tabernacle of the congregation and came out and blessed the people, and the glory of Yahweh appeared unto them. Okay? So Moses and them went in. God said they could do that. Then chapter 10 verse 1, look what Nadab and Abihu do. And Nadab and Abihu, the sons of Aaron, proud in their prominence, took either of them his censer and put fire thereon and put incense thereon and offered strange fire before Yahweh, which he commanded him not. So they did that which was wrong. They took a census and put fire thereon. They imagined they were also great. They thought they could go in, but God had said no. God hadn't said they should go in. And what was the consequence? As we said, verse 2, there went out fire from Yahweh and devoured them. And they died before Yahweh. Now look what they did. Come back over it in chapter 10. They put their incense on it. They didn't put the holy incense upon it. They used strange incense. We haven't time to write these quotes down, but they're there for you if you want them. There's where the right incense was made. All right? But the true incense is typical of prayer. Now, I'll turn this one up for you just to save a little bit of time. Psalm 141, but it's also in the book of Revelation several times. But Psalm 141 tells us that that's what it stands for. Verse 2. Let my prayer be set before thee as incense, and the lifting up of my hands as the evening sacrifice. And of course, in the book of Revelation, that refers to incense, our prayer in that book. And so they didn't take the true incense. They weren't doing prayer in the right way, typically, so to speak. Then they offered strange fire, not the fire off the altar, strange fire. They weren't commanded to do that. And then, well, look with me to verse 8 of that chapter that's before you, Leviticus chapter 10, verse 8. And that ye may put difference between holy and unholy, and between the unclean and clean, that ye may teach the children of Israel all the statutes Yahweh has spoken unto them by his hand. Have I got the wrong quote? No, I'm reading verses 8 and 9 is what it's supposed to be. And Yahweh spake unto Aaron, saying, do not drink wine, nor strong drink, nor thy sons with thee, when you go into the tabernacle of the congregation, lest you die. And it seems to imply that this is another reason why they felt quite proud. They were probably intoxicated. And very foolishly, they did that which was wrong. Now, it's intriguing. In the book of Leviticus, 16 times it says that they were told to do what Yahweh commanded. They didn't. They went their way. Well, it's important that what we should do is do what Yahweh commanded. Time's not with us. We must push on. So Nabad and Abihu were smitten. They fell on their faces. Fire devoured them. And their holy garments made in the way Yahweh wanted, were not consumed and were put aside. And so they died. And Aaron, their father, was not allowed to attend their funeral. You look at chapter 10, again, verse 6. And Moses said unto Aaron, and unto Eleazar, unto Ithamar his sons, uncover not your heads, neither in your clothes, lest ye die, lest wrath come upon all the people. But let your brethren and the whole house of Israel bewail the burning. They weren't allowed to. They weren't allowed to. They weren't allowed to because they know, and God knew, that they'd done the wrong thing. They learnt that Yahweh would only be sanctified in them who came nigh to him in the right way, doing the right thing. True incense, prayer. True fire, speaking of true sacrifice. Walking in that right way was truly the way, and obeying Yahweh. There's the issue. And so the consequence was they perished. Now, Phinehas saw that. Couldn't have helped to see it. And what did he learn from that? Well, he learned that you must indeed do that which is right. It showed that we must show true respect to Yahweh. And Phinehas would have learnt that, and we need to do that, to keep that in mind, to be obedient to the way Yahweh has indicated to us in the Word of God. Right, let's move on. Next issue. Come with me now to Numbers 25, our reading. This is the main story in Numbers chapter 25, to do with Phinehas. And we won't turn, we could. Look at chapter 26, verse 3. And Moses and Aaron and the priests spake with him in the plains of Moab by the Jordan near Jericho. Now here's the nation. They've been 40 years in the wilderness. And here they are right at the borders of the promised land. They should have learned. Do we learn? And did they do the right thing? They failed. At the borders of the promised land. We're at the borders of the promised land, brethren and sisters and young people. The kingdom's almost here. It's almost here. Let us not follow Nabad and Abihu, but Phinehas. All right? So there they are at the edges of the promised land, and corruption finally results. Look at chapter 25, verse 1. And Israel abode in Shittim, and the people began to commit whoredom with the daughters of Moab. They were going the worldly way. Worldly way. We wouldn't do that, would we? At the borders of the kingdom. And note, in chapter 24, verse 25, the last verse, which we had read to us a few minutes ago, and Balaam rose up and went and returned to his place. You should ring those words, his. And Balak also went in his way. You'd have thought that they had reformed. Balaam had learnt from what God had done not to walk in his way, but in God's way. But they didn't. They walked in their way. All right? So here it is. And Balaam had just left and went to his place and went his way. What happened then? Well, keep your hand there. But come with me to chapter 31, if you've got time, verse 16. Behold, these caused the children of Israel through the counsel of Balaam to commit trespass against Yahweh in the matter of Peor, and there was a plague among the congregation of Yahweh. So in other words, when they left, those two men, Balaam consulted with others and caused Israel to go in the ways of wickedness, following the ways of the world, the Moabites and such like, the wicked ways of the world. So the counsel of Balaam caused them to trespass. And what did they do? Well, we read about it in our readings. They committed whoredom with the daughters of Moab. So here's that Balaam said to Moabites, send your women in. Let them entice the ecclesia. to go in the ways of Moab. And they did. The wickedness of the world. You know, our world we're looking at today is indeed very, very wicked. You know, I don't want to dwell on it, but, you know, you can walk through a shopping centre. It's absolutely wickedness portrayed to us. They're showing the ways of Balaam. And the end result, they bowed to their gods. Now note, gods, in that verse that we saw before, or verse 2 of chapter 25, it's worth jotting down in the margin. And they called the people unto the sacrifices of their gods, is in the feminine gender. Okay? So it's enticement with women. Baal Peor was therefore basing upon women and enticing Yahweh, the children of Israel. And so what did God say to those people who followed that way? Yahweh said, hang their heads, verse 4. And Yahweh said unto Moses, take all the heads of the people and hang them up before Yahweh against the sun, that the fierce anger of Yahweh may be turned away from Israel. So, instructed them to do that. Here were probably the leaders of apostasy in that midst. They probably first stoned and then their heads were hung up as a public demonstration of their shame for following the worldly ways. But while this was going on, a Moabitish woman was brought into the camp, probably by a young man. Look at verse 6. And behold, one of the children of Israel came and brought unto his brethren a Midianitish woman in the sight of Moses and in the sight of all the congregation of the children of Israel, who were weeping before the door of the tabernacle of the congregation. Here, this worldly woman was brought in, and it would appear that they were up to wicked things. Very, very wicked things. See the word tent in verse 8. Maybe I'll read it to you. And he went also after the man of Israel, this is what Phinehas did, into the tent. Now the word tent, the Companion Bible says pleasure tent, where they were up to wicked mischief together. You can imagine. And Phinehas' response, he didn't muck around. And when Phinehas, verse 7, the son of Eleazar, the son of Aaron the priest, saw it, he rose up from among the congregation and took a javelin in his hand and went after the man of Israel into the tent and thrust both of them through the man of Israel. He was angered by this iniquity. He wanted to save the ecclesia. He didn't want this example to be the example that they might follow. And the result was he was greatly blessed. So here's what happened. Picture coming off the web. But there we go. And so he did something like that very, very quickly. And God thanked him. God blessed him. The grave crime led to a grave consequence. God's aim is always to save. Remember Exodus chapter 34 verse 7, keeping mercy for thousands and love. There's the nature of God. Now the man slain was Zimri of the tribe of Simeon. And those that died in the plague were 24,000. 24,000. Look at verse 9. And those that died in the plague were 24,000. God was acting strongly and doing like Phinehas did, destroying them. Remember what we read before? Then stood up Phinehas and executed judgment, and so the plague was stayed because of his action, his firm stand. 2 Corinthians, we won't turn to it, but chapter 7 says, dearly beloved, dressing us, let us cleanse ourselves from all filthiness of the flesh, perfecting holiness in the fear of Yahweh, fear of God. Well, that's what we must be doing, my dear brothers and sisters. Well, what happened to Phinehas? Time's not with me. Phinehas became the gatekeeper. He became a great gatekeeper. Now, we won't turn the quote up because I think my time is running a little bit behind time. But in 1 Chronicles, chapter 8, verse 19 to 20. Now, if you're writing something down in Numbers against Phinehas' name, this is a good quote. It says, Shallum of the Korites was keeper of the gates of the tabernacle and keeper of the entry. And Phinehas, the son of Eleazar, was the ruler over them in times past, which we're looking at now. And Yahweh was with him. What's the gatekeeper? He stops wicked people of the world coming into the ecclesia. Worldly people entering into the ecclesia. Keeps the world out and keeps the ecclesia together. Shuts the gates against iniquity. There's Eliezer and the gatekeepers. We'll talk more about gatekeepers a little later, briefly. All right? So then, the next incident. Now come with me to Joshua chapter 24. So now we're entering into the promised land. Joshua chapter 24. And come with me to verse 34 when you get there. Now in Joshua chapter 24 verse 34, they built an altar. A bit strange. We'll talk about it in detail in a moment. We'll read of it there. And the children of Reuben and the children of Gad called the altar Ed. Okay, and the word Ed means witness. For it shall be a witness between us and Yahweh, our God. Now, what's going on there? Well, this was not a normal altar, but it was to be an altar of witness between the tribes. That's what the 2.5 tribes from the eastern side of the River Jordan wanted it to be. Okay, now I want to go back into the background behind it now. That's the main thing for the moment. They were building this thing. Now why? Why? Well, the eastern 2.5 tribes had left their families for 7.5 years. Now I'll come forward a bit. We'll come back to this slide in a minute. So here are the 2.5 tribes here, and here are the 7.5 tribes here. So what happened is their territory here was given to them, maybe back in the time of Moses or just shortly afterwards. And then the 2.5 tribes, their men, very courageously, very diligently, came with the 7.5 tribes over onto the western side to help conquer this area. What a wonderful thing they did. A sacrifice. They left family behind, left farms behind, left their houses behind and came over. So here they are, and they came over for 7 years. Just think of it, brethren and sisters. For 7 years to conquer the West. A remarkable commitment to their brothers. And now, they were told by Joshua, look at chapter 22, verse 1. Chapter 22, verse 1. Then Joshua called the Reubenites and the Gadites and the half tribe of Manasseh, there's the 2.5 tribes, and said unto them, You have kept all that Moses the servant of Yahweh commanded you, and have obeyed my voice in all that I commanded you. Ye have not left your brethren these many days unto this day, but have kept the charge of the commandment of Yahweh your God. And now Yahweh your God have given you rest unto your brethren as he promised them. Therefore now return ye, and get you unto your tents, and unto the land of your possessions, which Moses the servant of Yahweh gave you on the other hand. So what were they going to do? They were going to cross over the River Jordan. Let's come back. They were going to come back here. But when they came back here, along the Jordan, somewhere along there, they built an altar. So, what were they doing? So they left Shiloh, that's where the tabernacle was at that time, and came to the borders of Jordan and built a great altar. Look at chapter 22, verse 10. And when they came unto the borders of Jordan that are in the land of Canaan, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh built there an altar by Jordan, a great altar to see to. So here it is. ESV says an altar of imposing size. Some commentators say this could be the altar, but we don't know. Okay? There is a few remnant altars, and it may be one of those that are in the land along the sides of the Jordan. We don't know. But let's come on. Oh, and of course, there was something in our readings only the other day, that the territory of the whole of the land of Israel was then divided up to all the tribes. But now let's come on. They were not to offer in any place. When I say they were not to offer on the altar to worship Yahweh in any other place but in Shiloh. Later on, Jerusalem. All right? But now at Shiloh. All right? But only at the tabernacle were they to offer. This altar seems to be a witness that they were one people. That seemed to be the aim of the 2.5 tribes. But they hadn't explained this properly to the 9.5 tribes in the west when they went. Probably they dreamed up doing this on the way home. All right? But now look at chapter 22, verse 11. And the children of Israel heard say, I've ringed the word heard say, behold, the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh have built an altar over against the land of Canaan in the borders of Jordan at the passage of the children of Israel. So here they built an altar, you see, they'd heard say. And what are they determined to do? Well, Deuteronomy says, you keep your hand there, maybe, or you could just jot that quote down in a minute. I'll read it to you. Deuteronomy chapter 13, verse 28. They were really most to inquire about these matters first. Verse 12. If thou shalt hear say in one of the cities which Yahweh thy God have given thee to dwell there, saying, certain men, the children of Belial, are gone out from among you and have withdrawn the inhabitants of their city, saying, let us go and serve other gods which ye have not heard. Then shalt thou inquire and make search and ask diligently, and behold, if it be truth and the thing certain, that such abomination is wrought among them, thou shalt surely smite the inhabitants. You know, that's what they were supposed to do. Inquire, listen carefully, and find out indeed why they were doing this. They didn't. They didn't. They just heard that an altar was built and they acted. Okay? You should diligently inquire and search. So that quote is worth jotting down against that Joshua. So the result was the whole congregation, because they didn't inquire, they didn't talk to their brothers and sisters and find out just what they were intending to do. Look at Joshua chapter 22, verse 12. And when the children of Israel heard it, didn't inquire properly, the whole congregation of the children of Israel gathered themselves together at Shiloh to go up to what? To war against the other half of the ecclesia. What a terrible thing it was. We must be careful, brethren and sisters, about this in ecclesial life. It's a major lesson for us that we learn from the life of Phinehas. Maybe they should have taken wise counsel. I'll turn you up that quote and read it to you. Proverbs chapter 24. In fact, I think I have got it next. No, I'll read it to you. Proverbs chapter 24, verse 6. They were really to ask for wise advice. Proverbs 24, and you could jot it down in that record in Joshua 22. Verse 6 says, for by wise counsel thou shalt make thy war, and in a multitude of counsellors there is safety. So you see, there's the two sides really laid out. They should have inquired, but they didn't. They jumped into action precipitously and caused a crisis within the ecclesia. They probably should have asked Joshua and Eliezer, who probably would have given them much wiser advice. However, Phinehas is not yet high priest, he's just priest. And what did they say to the eastern tribes when they came? Well, they said, you're apostate. Look at verse 16. Chapter 22, verse 16. Thus saith the whole congregation of Yahweh, what trespass is this that ye have committed against the God of Israel, to turn away this day from following Yahweh, in that ye have builded you an altar, that ye might rebel this day against Yahweh. If that altar was for sacrifice, that was true, but it wasn't. And they should have inquired. So they're first accused of apostasy, then of corrupt principles. Look at verse 17. Is the iniquity appeal too little for you? from which we are now not cleansed unto this day. So you're going after the way of apostasy, which they weren't. They said you're corrupting principles. They might have received, therefore, the judgment that would have come on Nadab and Abihu in the times past. Look at verse 19. Notwithstanding, if the land of your possession be unclean, then pass ye over into the land of the possessions of Yahweh, wherein Yahweh's tabernacle dwelleth, and take possession among us, but rebel not against Yahweh, nor rebel against us in building you an altar beside the altar of Yahweh our God. So he says, don't do this or God's judgments will come upon you. And so we can see what Phinehas was saying. What did he do? Well, he answered the matter before well, here's a warning. He that answereth a matter before he heareth is folly and shame unto himself. So they built that altar of witness, but the other 10 tribes shamefully didn't carefully hear as to what the reasons were. Sound advice for us in the ecclesia. Well, the eastern tribes, wise response. They listened carefully, chapter 22, verse 21. Then the children of Reuben and the children of Gad and the half tribe of Manasseh answered and said unto the heads of the thousands of Israel. So here they spoke. The 2.5 tribes spoke. And what did they state? They stated their aim. Look at verse 23. That we have builded us an altar to turn from following Yahweh. That we have built an altar to turn from following Yahweh, not for that purpose, or to offer thereon burnt offerings or meat offerings, or to offer peace offerings thereon. Let Yahweh himself require it. So he says, if we did that, let God judge us. We're not doing that. We're not sinning. And so the western tribes heard that. And the result was, look at verse 33, and the thing pleased the children of Israel, and the children of Israel blessed God and did not intend to go against them in battle to destroy the land wherein the children of Reuben and Gad dwelt, and so on. So they listened, and the altar was left then as a witness between the two. And behind that, guiding them on that area, was Phinehas. Remember, he was sent because they thought he would be a very decisive person. And so finally they hearkened, and probably with the guidance of Phinehas. Well, let's move on. Now, his father died at the end of the book of Joshua and was buried. Look at Joshua chapter 24, verse 33. The last verse, and Eleazar the son of Aaron died, and they buried him in the hill that pertaineth to Phinehas his son, which was given him in Mount Ephraim. So now Phinehas is high priest. And we go then into the high priest era when we come, of course, to the area of the judges. Okay? But I want to now come aside. Phinehas is referred to once in the area of the judges, but we haven't really time to look at it. But I want to talk about, remember, he was a gatekeeper. He was a gatekeeper. That implies a wall. Now, Phinehas was the ecclesial wall with the gates. Okay, now let's take the word wall, which is repeatedly used, particularly in the book of Nehemiah, but throughout the scriptures. If we get to Force Lexicon and we look up the word wall, it's the Hebrew word shomar. But look what it means. Oh, look what it means, brethren and sisters and young people. To enclose, to hedge about, hence to shelter. To shelter. It means also, secondly, to unite. So it means to keep the world out, to shelter, to unite them together, to flock together, to be joined. Keep the ecclesia in together, like we're doing tonight. And then finally, to warm, to glow with zeal and wrath. It means to enthuse. To enthuse. Now, those very acts were the acts that Phinehas followed. Phinehas followed those acts, my dear brethren and sisters and young people. Look at it. Phinehas built the national ecclesial wall. It was a spiritual wall, so to speak. What did it mean? What did he achieve? First of all, Phinehas, take the first word, means to enclose, to hedge about, to shelter. He separated them from the world. Remember when the Moabites came in? The plague came. He acted. And God saw that, and the nation saw that, and learnt that they've got to keep the Moabites out. That's the only way. Brethren and sisters, we've got to keep the world out. We are an ecclesia, separate ones, not walking the ways of this world, but keeping ourselves separate from the world in all that we do, in all that we live, in all the ways we dress. We walk in the ways of truth, not the ways of this world, brethren and sisters. It's the first point. Secondly, Joshua chapter 22. He actually united the ecclesia together, 7.5 tribes, brought them together, but wisely listening to what's really going on. Okay? Now remember what it means to unite, to flock together, to be joined. So he spiritually united the ecclesia at that time, who were really going to go to war against each other. If there hadn't been a wise man they trusted like Phinehas there, it could well have resulted. Let us be Phinehas's in the meeting, carefully listening, going Yahweh's way, but also listening to the brethren and sisters to see where they are walking. And then finally, he was a priest, later on a high priest. What should a priest do? Well, Malachi says, the priest's lips shall keep knowledge. Keep knowledge. And so what did he do? He was one who enthused the ecclesia, built them up and instructed them and strengthened them in their walk toward the ecclesia and in their way toward the kingdom of God. But you know, a wall has gates. And he was the one who closed the gates at the right time. And not only that, as I said to you before, he was one who was listening and instructing the ecclesia in the right way. And lastly, he studied the Bible and he enthused the brethren and sisters. He enthused them in the truth and walked solidly in that right way. Now, the kingdom is almost here. We should be doing the same. We should be indeed, young people, older brethren and sisters, separating from the world, being true ecclesias. We can see when we're true ecclesias by our walk, in our standard, in our dress, and our attendance at the meeting, our enthusiasm. And we need to unite, come together, get around and talk to our brethren and sisters, enthuse them in the truth, talk about the Word of God, talk about the good things so that they are strengthened. And when there is brethren and sisters that need it all the time, we should be doing that. And lastly, yes, we should unite and enthuse, as I said a moment ago. Enthuse with God's Word. Let it be, brethren and sisters and young people. That's what we do. Well, we'll leave it there. But indeed, Phinehas is a really remarkable example for every one of us. Let it be that we follow in that example. He was a man who really followed an example of the Lord Jesus Christ. Let it be that we do the same.